Great. This is an issue pertaining to CSU enrollment. These are two legislative proposals. The governor this year did not set enrollment targets for CSU. The Senate proposal would provide, well, actually, I'm sorry, I was going to structure this a little differently. I'll structure it that way. There are really three differences between the two houses. The first is regarding resident enrollment. Both houses set enrollment targets, but different enrollment targets. The Senate set a target of about 1% enrollment increase. That's about 3,500 students. The Assembly, by contrast, set an enrollment target of about 3%, or about 10,700 students. In addition, the Senate proposal would mandate that CSU would grow that enrollment by in 2016-17. The Assembly proposal gives CSU until fall 2017 to meet that enrollment target. And we think that there could be some sort of mix between the two houses here. You could think of it as the the Senate providing enrollment growth for 2016-17, the Senate considering enrollment out to 2017-18, similar to UC. So you could use the Senate as a starting point for 2016-17, and then in addition consider what enrollment you'd like to have for 2017-18. We would recommend that any funding that you'd like to provide for 2017-18 enrollment be appropriated in that year, however, because that's the year that they will incur the expense of that enrollment growth. The second key difference is regards summer school. The Assembly proposal provides $25 million for summer school that would provide additional courses and perhaps financial aid as well for students studying in the summer at CSU. The Senate did not have a proposal regarding that. We think the Assembly is very reasonable in trying to better utilize facilities over the summer and provide for summer courses. You could think of this as just additional enrollment growth. Adding courses in the summer would increase enrollment at CSU. So as part of considering what you'd like to do for enrollment, you could consider summer as well, and maybe even setting a summer enrollment target. And then the third and final difference is the total amount of funding. The Assembly proposal essentially meets a CSU budget request that provides funding above what they would say they would need for enrollment. CSU reports that they would spend the funding on capital outlay and student support services. The one thing we would note here is the legislature last year also fulfilled a CSU budget request, which included some student support and success initiatives. We would note that the trustees are still tracking how that funding was spent and are determining the effectiveness. So at this time, it's not clear how effective that funding was. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Yeah, I won't duplicate myself. Again, I would align my previous comments with UC on the eligibility study. There is one distinction, though, that I would make with the proposals to increase enrollment at CSU, and that is further in the agenda, but it has to do with the administration's proposal for $25 million in one-time funds for CSU campuses to implement their graduation plans. And the administration would note that the four-year graduation rate at the CSU campuses has been an emphasis throughout the budget process, and that we believe those graduation plans and funding that are imperative before we grow enrollments at the CSU. We believe that by better increasing four-year graduation rates at the CSU campuses, you do indeed increase throughput and access. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the committee. Mr. Obalnorte.
I had a question for the LAO. So the Senate plan proposes increasing CSU enrollment by 1%. The Assembly proposes 3%. The master plan goal is to admit the top third of California high school graduates. So my question is, how much of an enrollment increase would be required to meet the goal of the master plan, and how much funding would that represent?
So the master plan set eligibility for freshmen, which is the top third, as well as transfers, which is earning a certain GPA and completing certain courses. In terms of freshmen, without an eligibility study, we can't say for certain, but we believe that CSU was likely fulfilling the freshman side. They're currently admitting about 30% of high school graduates, and they're supposed to be drawing for admission from the top third. So if not all students are applying to CSU, they could very well be admitting all of the students that should be eligible under the master plan. For transfers, they are denying admission to transfers who meet their eligibility criteria, so they would be master plan eligible. It's about 13% of their transfer students. I don't have a particular number right now, but I'd be happy to get back with your staff on that.
That would be interesting to know, since that's the benchmark the master plan sets. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see where to begin. I like what Ms. Costa said with Department of Finance about the importance of investing in closing time to degree. Absolutely, we have to increase the four-year graduation rate in order to move people through the pipeline and into the workforce. I couldn't agree more. I think at the same time, the workforce demands are such that we also at the same time have to increase enrollment. We, by 2020, are going to have a dramatic shortage of college-educated students in California to meet the demands of the workforce. So I'd love to see if, as a conference committee, we could marry the various proposals together, and again, by maximizing dollars to ensure that more students have access to both the CSU and UC system in California. I'm intrigued by the LAO's suggestion that perhaps we could couple the Senate and the Assembly plans. My question regarding that is, so the Senate plan, if I understand it correctly, leaves it at the same level of funding that the governor's proposed. It just puts more restrictions on the money and gears it toward enrollment. Is that correct?
That's an accurate statement.
So my question is, in light of the recent faculty increases with the raises at the CSU campuses, would that in any way prevent the campuses from covering the costs associated with those increases, or could they both cover those costs and increase students next year by 3,500 students?
Right. I think it's worth noting that CSU in their original budget plan planned for 2% compensation increases, and now it's, for at least for faculty, it'll be about 7%. So it was much higher than what they were budgeting for. As we understand it, CSU does have some one-time funding available that they could allocate to those compensation increases. As we understand it, that's kind of their plan, is to use some of that one-time funding, maybe also use some of their campus reserves to fund those compensation increases. That's a short-term solution to a much longer problem, which could be, how do you fund these compensation increases? At this time, CSU really hasn't asked for additional funding beyond what their trustees' budget was. So it's hard to say exactly how much more funding they would need, but we'd be happy to follow up on that.
That would be helpful. I'd just be curious if the LAO or the Department of Finance thinks that restricting the $148 million would exacerbate their challenge in meeting the increased costs associated with the raises.
There's one more piece of information I should have indicated, and I apologize. The trustees did submit an expenditure plan under the governor's revenue assumptions, and they indicated that they would grow enrollment by 1%, and that's how they've been planning for enrollment. So the Senate plan really just adopts what the trustees had been planning to do under the governor's proposal.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Then I'd like to suggest we couple the Senate and Assembly plans and do it all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, issue 12, reporting and oversight.
All right, so there is a lot in this item. I think I'll try to walk through the various components. I'll try to keep it high level. If you have specific questions about any of the reports, I'd be happy to follow up on those questions. This is a general package that includes both reporting requirements and some additional funding proposals. I'll start with the first one for developing a CSU graduation improvement plan. That is originally a governor's May proposal. It's described on the bottom of the page there for $25 million one-time general fund. Both houses approved the governor's plan. They adopted additional language that the plans would look at additional things other than just your graduation rates for students and low-income students. It would also look for underrepresented students, for example. The differences in language aren't terribly significant. But the Assembly did not approve the $25 million for that purpose. The Senate approved $35 million for that purpose. The funding would be one time. We'd recommend, in this case, going with the Assembly. We're not sure that CSU needs one-time funding to produce this report, especially because it is in line with what they should be doing anyway, which is planning for certain performance measures. The next item involves Proposition 2 funding to pay down UC's unfunded liability for its retirement program. This was also a governor's proposal. The governor stipulated that UC had to adopt a new pensionable salary limit consistent with a limit adopted by the state a few years ago as a condition of receiving that funding. UC did adopt that pensionable salary limit, and in addition, it had also established a few defined contribution plans. Those defined contribution plans redirect a lot of the savings associated with adopting that pensionable salary limit towards those contribution plans. The Senate just approved the governor's proposal. The Assembly included language stipulating that UC would have to rescind those defined contribution plans. And on this one, I think we would just note that it depends on what your goals are for this funding. If your goals were simply for UC to adopt the pensionable salary limit, that's what they did. So the Senate would be good there. But if your goal was also to limit UC's compensation more broadly and to incur additional savings as a result of that, you might consider going with the Assembly instead. The third item to note here is $1.1 million ongoing into the auditor's budget to provide for ongoing UC audits. I think the idea is to produce reports of similar size and scope to the audit that was written about this year. We'd recommend maybe considering going with the Senate here. We think that there's if the legislature has an interest in doing another large-scale UC audit in 2016-17, it could work through the JLAC process. The fourth item is a report for all three segments to establish how they would meet certain goals as laid out by, in the case of UC and CSU, the Public Policy Institute of California, and in the case of the community colleges, workforce goals laid out by the California Workforce Investment Board. In the case of UC and CSU, we would just note that the Public Policy Institute of California's goals aren't really formal state policy. The legislature may consider first whether or not it wants to make those formal state policy before requiring that report. The last few items we don't have comments on, so I'll try to get through them really quickly. I apologize, this is a long list here. It includes reporting requirements for UC and CSU to report on the outside activities of senior level managers and executives. It requires language to adjust a current reporting requirement on the cost of instruction that they adopt. They both, UC and CSU, adopt a formal model established by a national organization. It includes $2 million to each segment to expand equal opportunity employment practices and to report on those practices. And it requires a report on, there was a governor's proposal to provide funding for community college the Community College Institutional Effectiveness Partnership. One House adopted language to expand some reporting language in that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
The analyst has done a nice job going over all of them, so I won't go into a lot of detail. I will say that generally the administration concurs with the legislature's interest in continued oversight of our public segments. However, I have a caveat, which is that we don't support those that include augmentations beyond what we've provided within the May revise. And two that I would highlight specifically out of the list are the Proposition 2 funding for the UC retirement plan. Current year budget bill language asked the UC regions to adopt a PEPRA compliant policy, which we believe they have complied with and therefore are eligible for the Proposition 2 funds. Secondly, the CSU graduation plans. As I stated, we included $25 million one time, released upon the trustees' approval of graduation plans, both system-wide and at the campus level. And we continue to believe that that is a good use of funds, and that there are probably going to need to be additional discussions on the reporting requirements here with the legislature.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mr. Obenorte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for the LAO. In Budget Subcommittee on the Assembly side, it was implied when we had testimony about the rescinding the direct contribution benefits option. The implication was that higher compensated employees were using that program to essentially double dip on their retirement benefits. What's your opinion about that?
Well, the defined contribution plans effectively provide additional benefits for employees that are paid above the PEPR cap, which is $117,000 a year, up to the IRS limit, which is, I think, $265,000 per year. So that includes some faculty and some executives. There are two different defined contribution plans. One effectively acts as a supplement to the defined benefit plan. The other one allows you to just opt into the defined contribution plan. And again, I think again it's sort of what are your goals for the program? If it's to limit overall compensation, then that's not happening under UC's plan. But if it was just to reduce the cost associated with UCRP's unfunded liability, the defined contribution plans don't add to that unfunded liability. So again, there's it sort of depends on what your goals are for the program.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or feedback? Okay. Then with that, we'll move on to issue 13, higher education, legislative augmentations.
Apologies, I'm just getting to the page. So this is a package of items that pertain to proposals that came from the legislature. Mostly, there are a few that pertain somewhat to governor's proposals. I'll try to be a little quicker than I was in the last item. I know there are a lot of proposals in here. They generally focus on research items. There's a proposal in the Senate to establish a firearm violence research institute at UC. Some of them are focused on public service. There are a few in the Assembly that focus on public service, including $22 million to expand innovation and entrepreneurship activities, and $3 million to the Charles Drew Medical School. There is funding for outreach programs at UC and CSU, including $20 million on the Assembly side and $4 million on the Senate side. There was a governor's proposal initially to provide $4 million at one time for a UC outreach program. Both houses are not providing funding for that specific UC outreach program, but they're providing other funding for broader UC outreach programs. And I'd be happy to answer questions on any of those outreach programs. There's a Senate proposal to provide $6 million to expand student services for student services at CSU. There's an Assembly proposal to provide $20,000 for a financial aid program related to the Semester at Sacramento program. It's at the Center for California Studies. And there's a $1 million proposal for the state library to expand educational activities about the history of Japanese American internment. We just have a few comments and areas of consideration that you might want to consider as you're considering this package. The first question you might want to consider is, to the extent these are high priorities for the legislature, traditionally the state has focused on undergraduate education at UC and CSU. A lot of these proposals focus on UC's other mission, which is research and public service. So again, you might want to consider which of these are high legislative priorities. The second question you might want to consider is to the extent to which that state funding is necessary to achieve the goals of these programs. You especially want to consider that for any research proposals that you hear in this in conference, given that research typically has federal and private sources available as well as state sources. And finally, you want to consider to the extent to which you might be duplicating efforts with other proposals. For example, there's a Senate proposal to provide an education block grant, and some of the activities in that block grant might be similar to some of the outreach programs that you're providing funding for at UC and CSU. As another example, the state already includes Japanese American internment in the history standards for high schools. So there's already, those activities are already being done. So you might want to consider to the extent to which you could fund these programs or maybe provide funding in the other program proposals that you're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Thank you. Yes, the administration opposes the augmentations made by both houses. I would note we continue to support our proposal to fund UC Scout, which provides A to G courses for California high school students online for $4 million.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a question for the LAO. Can you walk us through the difference between the $4 million one-time general fund for development of A through G courses that the Senate has proposed, which is within an existing UC outreach program, and then the Department of Finance's Scout program?
I'd be happy to walk through that and also touch on what the Assembly did as well. The governor proposed providing in May $4 million one time for the UC Scout program. The UC Scout program develops free online course material for A through G and AP courses. If students want to use that curriculum as a course, they have to pay a fee either to use the online platform with a teacher provided by the high school, or UC Scout will provide a teacher for that course at another charge. Both houses rejected that proposal just for UC Scout. The Senate adopted the one-time funding and indicated that they would allocate towards another UC outreach program that focuses on A through G course completion. Language is still pending, so I'm not sure at this time which program that would go to. For the Assembly also approved the $4 million one time and approved an additional $6 million ongoing. This would be broadly available to any UC outreach program.
So aside from the $6 million additional in the Assembly proposal, accurate to say that maybe one of the more significant differences between the House's proposal and the Scout is that the Houses don't have a fee? So the UC Scout program charges fees, but the governor didn't propose any sort of fees. Those fees were already a part of the UC Scout program. Okay. And do you have a take on the nature of fees for these sorts of services? I'm not sure. I think that the idea of the fees is that they're covering the cost of instruction rather than the course material, which is offered for free. I think the questions that we would ask are the extent to which that UC Scout is fulfilling a need that other private entities that charge fees aren't already fulfilling, whether or not the courses that would be developed by UC Scout are meeting high needs, if there's a lot of enrollment associated with those courses. Those are the sorts of questions we asked in our analysis of that proposal.
And Mr. Chair, Christian Osmani with Finance. Just to clarify, the administration's intent is to create a free infrastructure of online classes and curriculum for schools to use. So the fee-based program is to the extent a school does not want to make the teacher available and to teach the course themselves, they can pay UC to teach it for them. But classes and curriculum developed by UC Scout are available freely for all students in California.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions from the committee? Seeing none, moving on to issue 14, precision medicine.
We'll be happy to introduce the item. This is a governor's January proposal. It's to provide $10 million in one-time funding for precision medicine research. Some of the funding would be available for research projects. Another portion of the funding would be available to collect a database of researchers and funding available for precision medicine and put that database online. This is similar to a proposal that was, this was similar to an item that was funded in the 2014-15 budget. That item provided $3 million one time. We recommend going with the Senate on this one. During the budget process, we did recommend against the governor's proposal. We have some. I think this raises questions about why precision medicine as opposed to maybe other research areas that might be of high priority to the legislature. We haven't seen a clear justification of that. In addition, at the time this proposal was made, we had some questions about some of the key details of the proposal. The administration did provide us some additional information. We still have some concerns about some of the administrative costs associated with the proposal. So for that reason, we recommend going with the Senate and rejecting the governor's proposal. Thank you.
Ms. Costa.
Thank you. We support the Assembly version. The only difference would be that in the Assembly version, they asked for some geographic diversity in the grant award, and the administration is fine with that.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions from the committee? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to issue 15, financial aid.
Paul Glozewski with the LAO. There's 3 financial aid issues before you, 2 on the Assembly side, 1 on the Senate side. None of these were governor's proposals. The Assembly approved an increase in competitive Cal grants from 25,750 grants to 30,000 grants. These grants are generally for students who are not eligible for Cal Grant entitlement. They tend to be older students. We estimate the costs associated with this proposal would be $10.7 million in the budget year, growing to about $31 million upon full implementation. Currently, the Student Aid Commission reports that only about 1 in 13 of applicants who are eligible for these grants receive them due to limited funding. So although we would know if you do expand the grants, it's likely that it could help more students attend college who currently don't receive them. The second issue on the Assembly side is reporting language for our office to report on a consolidation of state and institutional financial aid programs, as well as options to reduce and eliminate student debt. The proposal would also make some changes to some existing reporting requirements for our office to free up time for this report. And we have no concerns with the Assembly proposal and would recommend adopting it. The Senate proposal before you is $340,000 general fund, of which $90,000 is one time, to create a new CalSOAP consortium in the Inland Empire. CalSOAP is a outreach program run through the Student Aid Commission. The consortia that it funds, there's 14 of them right now. They consist of groups of county offices of education, school districts, UCs, and CSUs. They generally provide services like tutoring and college preparatory services in high schools. There are consortia, 14 of them throughout the state. They don't reach every area of the state, nor have they done so historically. This proposal would place one in the Inland Empire. We would note that you have heard various other proposals over the last few agenda items on college preparation, so you might want to consider how this fits within those efforts. And regarding the effectiveness of the CalSOAP program, there is some data to suggest that students in these programs have higher college-going rates, but an external evaluation that the Student Aid Commission had done recently of the program concluded that there were some issues with the data tracking. So, for example, a lot of this data is based on self-reports of students in their senior year of high school, and we don't know for sure if they actually end up enrolling. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Thank you. We do not support either of the proposals on the agenda. I would just note for the competitive Cal Grant program that existing law authorizes the Commission to issue 25,700 new competitive Cal grants, and that in the 2015 Budget Act, we did increase the number of new awards by 3,250.
Thank you. Back to the committee. Yes. Senator Leno.
Thank you. Question either for LAO or Finance. With regard to the proposal that would have the LAO report on consolidating state and institutional financial to provide debt-free college, you had made mention that it would repeal 2 existing statutes relative to other reporting impositions, requirements of the LAO. Given that those statutes were created through policy bills, so they went through policy committee, they had policy analyses, and the legislature decided to pass them and the governor signed them, do we often reverse statutes in a conference committee where there's no public participation, no policy analysis, no policy discussion? We required all that to put it into law. Now we're considering taking it out of law, but with none of the process. Not so much relative to this suggestion, but in general, how does that land on you? And I know, this is about requiring you to do something, so I'm trying to take it out of that realm, but just the process question.
Generally, I would say the trailer bill that you pass as part of the budget package often makes various changes to existing law that were first enacted as part of policy bills. So I don't necessarily think we would view this.
So it's not that uncommon?
No.
Ms. Costa?
I would concur with that assessment. I mean, we are amending statutes, so through both the budget bill and the trailer bills, it happens.
And given that it is specific to reporting, with other reporting, again, you just don't see anything uncommon about it.
Yeah, we don't see anything uncommon about making changes through trailer bill to policies that were first put into place through the policy committee process.
Good enough. Thank you.
Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, I thank my esteemed colleague. An analyst I do find just very uncommon. Maybe not uncommon these days, but it has become a common practice to pass major policy matters in budget trailer bills every year, a lot of them. This would be of the least onerous that I contend with, but I guarantee you this budget will have many attending trailer bills with major policy implications that will not go through any policy committee whatsoever. So I would hope analysts would be very concerned about this. I would hope finance would be very concerned about it, and I would hope that the legislature would be very concerned about it.
Thank you. Back to the committee. Any other final questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. This concludes our education agenda. We will recess until 3 p.m. this afternoon, at which point we'll reconvene and go through the Health and Human Services agenda. Thank you.